katou katoa, ki atua tēnā koe, kia Papatuanuku tēnā koe, kia te whare tēnā koe, tēnā hanga mate ki te hanga ara, tēnā koutou katoa. Giving it a go today.
Well done, Chair. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, I am
Chair,
too.
can I stand to acknowledge and to mihi to you and to thank you for that acknowledgement of the language, one of our official languages. And can I add to it, if I may? It's sort of times like this when we appreciate sometimes our vulnerability. And on this occasion, I'm talking about children. Not necessarily our own children here, but children nonetheless. And there were 3 that were lost on the Takapo Plains yesterday in an accident. And some of us will know that there are parents, uncles and aunties who will be missing them severely today. So in the line of the mihi to our mate, Chair, can I acknowledge rātau, e ai tua ina nahi rei, tēnei te mihi ki rātou e ngaro nei, kai runga ki tēnā tawahi kai tuat. Acknowledging the loss of those children and particularly the cloud that hangs over the parents, the uncles, the aunties, the grandparents today. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Welcome, Craig. Apologies, James. Now, we've got a very full agenda today, as you have seen.
Apologies, Chair.
Yeah, I'll get on to apologies, Councillor. A very, very full agenda. We've got an apology from Martin Williams, Councillor Williams, who's in Blenheim today, but he's going to zoom in at 10 a.m. and we'll see which way we were up to at that point. He does want to join some part of the day. We have in attendance today Craig.
Not an apology, Chair, excuse me, but Charlie is going to be late. He's got a family matter he's dealing with.
So that's a late apology for lateness.
Yes.
for Charlie. No other apologies. Peter, welcome. Good to see you here. And we've got our colleagues from across the way and City Council. So good to see you here. I'm assuming you've got here for which agenda item? Is it the Auditor General's report you're here for? We'll get it. We'll move quickly.
Here.
Can I have a mover for the apologies? We've got one for Charles and one for. We've got a mover, Councillor Bombay, and second, Councillor Barker. All those in favour of receiving the apologies will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. That's carried. Are there any notices?
Well, I've got a thing, and I need to raise it, and it's not a notice, but I suppose it's just in relation to the Māori wards, and I need to make that clear because Te Whanganui Arotu, the Tai Whenua, said to make sure you advise the council they were disappointed in regards to.
Can we hear that shortly, Peter?
Oh,
Can I
yeah.
get you to speak to that?
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And we'll treat that as I don't dare call it a minor item because it's not, but
Yeah, and it's only a 2 minute.
yes. So we'll cover that
Got it.
topic.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing that forward. Are there any other notices that
Just,
bring forward?
Mr. Chair, it was just a point of order question, if you're able to take one.
Sure. You order?
Yeah,
Point of order?
just with our recent meeting, just in and around the code of conduct for the meeting, how it behaves. There was a bit of disruption last week, and so just a quick question maybe of the CEO that the code of conduct, what the expectations are of behaviour for those particularly visitors to the room. Can you just give us a quick summation of that? Because it was very disruptive last week.
Sure. And I'm not sure whether that's a point of order, although it relates to order of the
Sure.
committee. But a very good point. And once the CEO has made a comment, I'll also make a comment on that as well.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the question raised about the code of conduct and the conduct of members of the gallery, Just to clarify for councillors, the code of conduct does relate to the relationship between councillors and one another, councillors between themselves, with staff, the media and the general public. And so the code of conduct is very much focused on the conduct of councillors. With respect to the participation in the meetings by members of the public, and particularly the requirement that members of the gallery don't contribute to the meeting unless otherwise invited to do so by the chair, that's covered by standing orders. And so in that respect, it's not acceptable under council standing orders for members of the gallery to make interjections or make comments, and it's certainly the preference as articulated in the standing orders for members of the public to listen, and they're very welcome to do so, and obviously we live stream the meeting so that it is available for all. But if a member of the public wishes to speak to a council meeting or council committee meeting, it is something they need to seek permission from the chair of the committee or from the council for in advance. And it's something which historically we've been accommodating around, and we will certainly provide opportunities for members of the public to address council if they have matters they wish to raise, but doing that in an ad hoc fashion from the floor of the gallery is not conducive with orderly conduct of the meeting. So what occurred at the last council meeting was wide of the mark in terms of the normal expectation of that, and so we just take this opportunity to remind members of the public that that is the way in which we conduct council business.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, James. In responding, Councillor, essentially it's rather than a code of conduct matter, it's a standing order matter and an order of the meeting matter, and I'd go further than the Chief Executive has indicated and say that the behaviour and use of te reo in the way it was used in the gallery, no matter what language is used, it's not going to be tolerated for one moment. Intimidatory, derogatory comments of that nature. If I'd been more aware of the language, I would have raised significant issues at the time. So not accepted, and I suggest that all chairs of committees and council take a very, very strong line on behaviour like that in the future. That's immediately dealt with, and those people making those sorts of comments need to be out of the building. Councillor Barker.
Thanks.
I'd add one issue to that. Craig will know that previous place that he worked, it was against standing orders to speak or interact with people in the gallery. And as a consequence, it was against the gallery interacting with the people in the chamber. I've noticed there is a tendency here in this council for people to interact and speak to and direct comments to people in the gallery. So when you do that, you invite a reply. So if we're going to have it that there's no one from the gallery interacts with the councillors, well then councillors need to make sure the debate is between them and in this council to clear the line.
I hear what you're saying, Councillor. Councillor Wambay.
So a point of clarification on all of that. So we have three groups of people actually when we're actually sitting as a council. So we have councillors, we have the gallery, but we also actually have members from the RPC. Where do the members of RPC sit? Are they part of the gallery, or are actually seen as councillors and therefore covered by code of conduct?
Well, those in attendance, for example, Mr. Eden today is a part of this committee, and any other of the RPC or Māori committee members who are members of the committee share and enjoy all of the privileges of being around the table and with complete speaking rights and voting rights in committee. Those that if attending casually and in the gallery, they're members of the gallery. They're not part of the committee.
You just need to have that clarified.
Sure.
Chair, could I just add to that, just by way of clarification, that council has resolved in adopting the code of conduct, which it is required to have under the Local Government Act, and members are required to abide by the code of conduct. Council has resolved that that code of conduct will apply to all council committees, including Māori Standing Committee and the Regional Planning Committee, and the members of those committees. So The Code of Conduct does apply to our tangata whenua representatives, and I just remind councillors as well as tangata whenua representatives that in terms of their interactions between one another, the Code of Conduct does assert the importance of maintaining courteous relationships and engagements and avoiding aggressive, bullying or offensive conduct, including the use of disrespectful or malicious language. So I guess there's been some strong passions in recent weeks around the issues that we've been confronting, and from my perspective, I think it's important to remind all of those bound by the Code of Conduct of what is expected by way of behaviour and interaction.
All righty, we've spent a bit of time on that. If there's no other burning issue on that, we'll move on and go to the conflict of interest declaration. Are there any issues of conflict in today's meeting for anyone? No conflicts anyone's got to declare? No. Moving on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the Corporate and Strategic Committee, which I'm sure each council would have read on Stella. Is that right? No, they haven't. Oh, well done, Councillor.
Chairman, I move that these minutes be held over to the next meeting.
Be held over?
Yeah, to the next meeting.
So we can, I've read them now, though, have you?
I've only just got them in the hand. Let's just hold them over the
Sure.
next meeting.
Thank you. The councillors, for those that were scrambling around to find them, they weren't on Stella. And so therefore you won't have had a chance to have a look at those. Let's carry those over. Happy with that? You don't need a resolution for that, do I? Moving on to the agenda item 4, which is the follow-up on page 7. Who have we got talking to that?
We'll take this as read, Chair. There's happy to take questions on those.
Any issues there for anyone? That Councillor Barker?
I was looking for my notes on this. If I recall it from my notes, the health and safety. I see that we weren't going to take any further action about that. And unless councillors had some issues they wish to raise for themselves, which seems to me to be getting councillors to identify for themselves what they don't know about health and safety. But you don't know what you don't know, because you don't know. Now, the second thing I'd like to make is that you see there's some charges being made over White Island on health and safety legislation. Let's be clear, people are taking this very seriously. And so I think we do need to step up our game on health and safety. And I do think that the briefing for councillors needs to be improved, and I disagree with the statement there. When it gets down to health and safety, at the end of it, it's you, James, and all the councillors around this table who are going to be held responsible. So I just think we need to up our game, and I think we should have a full one-day seminar on health and safety to make sure people are very well aware of what the Act says and their responsibilities. Because I don't believe there are councillors around this table have that understanding. Having been through this with the Port of Napier, I can tell you that after 2 days, I was quite concerned about what I didn't know.
So, look, Chair, I agree with everything that Councillor Barker has raised. That was the reason why we organised a briefing on all of those legislative responsibilities for councillors out at Works Group soon after the last local government elections, and we brought in an independent advisor to run a 2-hour session on that. I'm not sure whether all councillors were present, and we're happy to run it again. I guess the point is that we felt that we'd taken the initiative to ensure that councillors had been briefed on their responsibilities, and if a refresher course is requested, then we'll certainly organise one.
Look, let's put that on as a follow-up item, Councillor. Would you be happy to see that on the program for early next year, an approach on health and safety?
Well, that's a great decision-making process. We're going to have a follow-up on a follow-up.
Chair, look, I'd welcome guidance from the committee. Look, it's not difficult for us to organise a session. We just obviously would like there to be good attendance if we do organise one. So
I agree with that. So if we can have a clear commitment from councillors that are going to attend, then I think we should put the effort in to make sure it's done.
All right. So
is there a desire by the committee to have another session? I'm hearing from.
Well, I'd agree with Councillor Barker that it's a timely reminder of where our responsibilities start and end, and those things which we need to have reported to us, and all those mechanisms in place. And recent events such as the White Island thing, it's often directors or governors don't quite realise the obligations they have to inquire, and that. So I think to keep everyone safe would be a very good idea.
Let's take the next best opportunity for that, if we're in agreement with that, include that as a...
Could I helpfully suggest that the regional council approach the firm that provided the health and safety briefing for the Port of Napier? They did, I thought, an outstanding job.
Sure. All right, sounds good. Thanks, councillor, that's a good suggestion. Can I, you're moving to the receipt of the report?
I'll move.
Yeah, thank you. Second to councillor Ormsby. All those in favour of receiving the follow-up report, say aye.
All right.
Those against will say no. That is carried. We move to agenda item 5, call for minor items not on the agenda. And Mr. Eden, you had an item in regard to Māori constituencies you'd like to traverse with the committee?
Yep, that.
Okay. So we'll just do that at the end, so we'll just record that.
Okay.
Any other items?
Yep, and it was follow-up to the minutes, but I can bring it up, and it's just around the recognised seasonal employment scheme. That obviously there's been an addition to people coming in the country and just around. I know we had a discussion, so I can raise that in minor items, or I know it's noted in some of the information that's being discussed. So either can I bring it up at the end or during discussions.
Thank you.
Okay.
There's plenty of interest in that, I'm sure. Councillor Van Beek will go to that. Any other items of minor business that you want to see dealt with? No. Well, we'll cover that. Cover that in due course. We move to agenda item 6, which is the Pettigrew Green Arena car park issue. Now, I just want to, Chris, you're coming forward. Now, Glenn's coming
Glenn
through
from
as well.
Napier City.
So this is Glenn Lucas, he's the Manager of Parks and Recreation from Napier City Council, so Glenn's here just to assist
Sure.
with
No.
any tricky questions.
Great move. Happy to have Napier City Council around the table any time, Glenn, so welcome. I just want to ask for your opinion, councillors, in regard to Mr Waterhouse, who's here today. He has requested time to comment to council. The next opportunity would be the actual regional council meeting on the December the 16th. However, given that he's here today and is prepared to give us a few minutes only of his time, can I indulge you to receive his commentary on this topic? Is there any objection to that taking place today?
Good leadership, Chair.
Thank you for that. Well, Craig, thank you very much. I'll call you up after we've had this discussion.
Chair, can I just clarify? So we were working with Mr Waterhouse around a full presentation on this issue from his board for the council meeting on the 16th. Is that still the preference to do that in addition?
Rex would allow us, yes. We've got a full presentation. Okay, I wasn't quite aware of that part, Craig, but...
Excuse me, I thought the deal was that we did all the big presentations and all the work at the committee stage, and we made the decision to put the recommendation up. Why are we doing it the other way around?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is that we had such a packed agenda today that we thought that that could be quite a conversation that we would have more time for on the 16th. In addition to that, what we're seeking today is some direction from this committee that would then involve further discussion with Napier City Council, and there may well be questions that arise today that require some further work. So we're taking this as an iterative conversation, particularly because there's multiple parties coordinating here. So rather than try to do this in one hit, we saw this as an iterative conversation between now and the next council meeting.
All right, well, let's, you raise a really good point, Councillor Barker. I wasn't quite aware that there was need to be an extensive presentation on the 16th. I wonder whether, in fact, we address that now, hear from Craig now, and make it a call after that as to whether we do need a further presentation. I'm not convinced that we would. So let's do it in this committee where it's meant to be held, and proceed from there. So, Chris,
Okay.
can you roll this out?
Kick off, and also we have Councillor Keith Price down the back there, so just acknowledging him. And you've got another guest there, Keith,
Councillor Freddie Wilson.
well, both from Napier City Council.
And we're not allowed to interact.
What's this interaction going on?
We can't interact with you.
That's exactly right. What's this interaction going on? Breach of standing orders ready to be hauled off before the
Please
Privilege
proceed,
Committee.
Mr. Dolly.
Okay, so look, really we wanted to bring this topic to this committee to develop a position from the Hawke's Bay Regional Council with regards to, I guess, instruction to the Pettigrew Arena around opportunities for car parking. So it's a high profile site. It's a high profile decision. So we wanted to make sure we fully engaged with the whole council around that process. So I guess we haven't delved into the business case behind the expansion of Pettigrew Arena. I think we've gone into this discussion with the view that we do need additional court space and the like for Napier and Hastings. So this is more a discussion around the options around the car parking. And the Pettigrew Arena Trust is in receipt or has been working with the Provincial Growth Fund around funding of that expansion. So they're on a pretty tight time frame to resolve this particular issue. So in parallel, this issue is also being brought to Napier City Council because there are two main options, one being a car park on the riverside of the Stop Bank in Taradale, and there's a diagram in the pack showing that location, and the other option is the car park behind the expanded Pettigrew Arena building. So, Glenn has really taken the lead, and both organisations have been involved in a risk assessment or an assessment by staff, and so that's that colour-coded chart that's attached in your pack, and that looks at a whole bunch of criteria and the pros and cons of each site. And we also looked at a third alternative, which was a hybrid option, sort of a little bit of both. So what's very clear from that analysis is that the hybrid option is really not worth pursuing. It takes the worst aspects of both options forward, so to speak, and that the analysis for the Napier and Hawke's Bay sites are reasonably close. So I think when you look at it, the lower the number, the more favourable the option, and you'll see there's probably only about 5 or 6 points difference between the two sites. So because there wasn't a clear-cut winner, and because both councils have significant land holdings next to the site, and that the site is quite constrained in how it can provide the required parking, we wanted to initially have a discussion here, and the thinking was we would then hear from Craig and the board at the next council meeting, and we also have Napier going through this process as well. So we triage all those decisions together to help move us forward. So really, that's the introduction. It's around forming a position. I guess the one thing that I wanted to point out as staff of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and the fact that we've just been through a major flooding event, is that the Regional Council car park option knowingly puts 400 car parks in a flood hazard zone when there is an alternate parking arrangement there. So I think in light of a lot of the damage that we've recently seen around Napier, and I guess my portfolio of managing our flood resources, infrastructure, that's something I wanted to bring forward. But I do realise there's a whole lot of other aspects, and certainly the additional court space is badly required. So it was really to look at the different lenses. In the assessment, everything has been weighted equally, so there may be some feedback to maybe weight some of those elements more than others, but really just wanted to hand it over for a general discussion, and happy to sort of answer as many questions as we can.
Just before we do, I just want to welcome Councillor Lambert.
Sorry for being late.
No, it's fine. Your apology was put in, so welcome. Thank you. Yeah. So we're looking for some comment on this topic. I know that it's sort of vexed a few councillors around the table. So, are there any questions on this that Councillor Bimbay?
Yeah, point 47, and that's regarding the land that is actually owned by the EIT, which in the paper is called a potential showstopper.
Yep.
Can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah,
please?
so the car park has a multi-purpose in that there's an arrangement between the EIT and the Pettigrew Arena where car parking can be utilised by the EIT during the day, and then car parking utilised by the Pettigrew Arena during events, with a view that when there's large events that the EIT car parking can be utilised by Pettigrew Arena. So there is a land a swap or a land transaction that is required where a thin slither of the EIT land is required for access around the building. And it is true to say that the EIT have a very firm view on where that car park should go, to the extent that it's almost a conditional deal. So that just adds to the complexity with that third party whose land transaction is required, has a very firm view on where the car park should be. So that adds to the challenge of the decision making.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and subsequent question. And has that been included in the rating of the different options?
So yes, so in the chart there's an area, I think, risks, under risks, EIT support. So that risk has been rated as 1, which is highly favourable for the regional council car park, and as a 5, which is the poorest score it could receive for that particular matter. But it has been weighted equally with all those other items on the table.
It has been taken into consideration. Thank you. It's hard to read, so.
Councillor Ormsby.
Kia ora. I'm looking at point 33, the assessment results and the scoring table that you have in there. So was this table formulated by both councils?
That's correct.
Yep.
So Glenn initially came up with the table through a bit of a workshopping process. He came over and sat down with us, and we worked through the table together, and so we're satisfied with the outcome of
The
the table.
supplementary. So Napier City Council also prefer the option 1 that's there.
So I think Napier City Council hasn't met on this issue
Yep.
yet. I understand. I have the dates here.
Through that scoring system, you know, with all the pros and cons, Napier City Council, the staff that have been involved with this criteria, see that this is the most preferable option.
To answer the question, it's a technical assessment that the officers have done. We've agreed with Chris and his team from HBRC, and we're in agreement of the scores and the ratings. But the fact that it is quite close means that it's quite a complex decision, and therefore it needs to go to both councils and be sorted. Yeah.
Following up on that, Glenn, what is the Napier City Council staff's position and advice to council in regard to which is their preferred option?
As much as possible, the two reports are identical. So we tried to make sure that the assessment and the words around it are identical for both councils.
I hear, but what is your advice to your council in regard to the preferred option?
That the technical assessments don't really have a really clear winner, and there are a whole bunch of complicated factors, and that, it's a kick for catch, to be fair to me.
How long have you been in public service? Councillor Foss.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions. Just the car park, let's say it is on the over the stop bank example. My visualisation of that is a bunch of asphalt down there and a lot of kind of hard infrastructure. Is, in fact, there another model where grass can be used with maybe some better drainage or something in that area for normal conditions? And how often is it envisaged that car park would actually be required, given, I presume it's when the facility is at capacity or there's a big event on? So I'm trying to, because your point is all about risk, and so, well, okay, how often would this risk present itself?
So the utilisation model that I'm aware of is it's a high utilisation model. So there's 400 car parks. I think 200 are shifted from the current car parking arrangement, and so they are used day to day. And so they are used for EIT, for students attending, and so that's quite regular, every day. And there's regular events there. So I wouldn't put it in the category of like some event centres have like an overflow car park arrangement, which is a grass oval that might get used a couple of times a year. My understanding is this is a consistent use, and it would need to be paved because of the location and the amount of use. It would just essentially end up as a mud pit if we went for a grass type solution.
Okay, and then in and around costs, because that's referenced in the paper. As I understand it, the PGF grant was all encompassing. So financially, if we went for, say, that option, what would the direct net cost be to the regional council if in fact that's part of that development and we get reimbursed?
Yep. So there's no cost to the regional council under our current discussions. The regional council won't be contributing any funds at all to the project. It will simply be allowing land that's under our control to be utilised by a third party through a suitable agreement.
Okay, so cost considerations or cost weightings then are irrelevant as far as that. So then finally, the real concern is also about flood risk,
Yep.
1 in X years,
Yep.
and whatever that might be. And so we have many early warning systems further upstream for when events are coming. So we can predict when there's possibly one.
Yep.
Of course, we don't know exactly how it'll play out, but we have some fair warning. So A, is there an option in there where someone has a veto, look, we're concerned about the severe weather warning or something, therefore this car park will be closed and the arena would have to deal with that themselves. Is that an option? And then complementing that, B, with another report in the public domain that we have here today of the various activities, our early flood warning systems are rated very, very highly. And I don't know if it's significant activities or compliance, I think it is. They've got green lights pretty much all over them, and so well done to you and the team. So again, is that a pretty powerful mitigating factor given the key point of your concern is if there's a flood, therefore we're liable and it's X, Y, Z.
So absolutely. So the green dots in that report are more around the availability of that flood forecasting service, and we certainly can forecast floods, although it's not a foolproof method, as we saw with the last event that effectively fell on Napier, and it was quite surprising the way it unfolded. So yeah, in terms of warning, there is ability to give warning. However, it's not 100% mitigation to that risk. So yeah, there is warning ability there. Then there's also the practicalities of shifting a large volume of up to 400 vehicles should a warning come about, and whose responsibility it would be to contact those people. Whether any other party felt that there was liability on the regional council. Now, of course, we wouldn't go into this taking any responsibility for the private property in there. There is a car park in Wellington on the Hutt River that is also in a river berm, which is more of a legacy car park, and they have lost vehicles within that car park. Yeah. So I did a little bit of research into that and asked about that model. So where these car parks exist in other areas, there has been a property loss. But again, it's weighing up the value of that car park, 99.9% of the time, due to the risk when we have a flood. And the assessment by the team is that a car park located in that area would see flooding on about a 1 in 5 year return period. And of course, with climate change, that's likely to increase.
Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. That did cover a little bit, that answer, because I was interested in, did it flood? So 2 questions really. Did it flood in the last heavy rain? And the second question is debris. How much debris was, because in floods, trees and stuff comes down the river. How much debris was on this, the last flood?
So the last flood was mainly concentrated on the Napier urban area. Rivers did come up, but they didn't come up beyond an annual sort of level. So it was more a urban centre flood event rather than a regional river flood event. That said, if there was a major flood, we would expect debris and dead trees and all sorts of stuff to be coming down the river. Where exactly it lands or how much there is uncertain, but it's part of that destructive force when a major flood is unfolding.
Councillor Barker.
Is it not possible for the EIT Pettigrew Arena to mitigate each and every one of these risks associated with having the car park on the inside of the slot bank? And could the cost of that be offset by the fact that they would be potentially getting land for zero, as opposed to paying many hundreds, if not millions of dollars for the land?
Yeah. So I think in both options, I can't comment on the Napier, any commercial model or financial model around the Napier land, but both options, the Napier model is a reserve land held by Napier City Council, and ours is, of course, land managed by us. So it's very likely that there's a zero transaction cost for both of those options. And it is fair to say that the entity could undertake a mitigation strategy, and now how that would exactly look and the effectiveness of that's something that would need to be answered by others.
Chair, could I just perhaps add to that, look, if the situation was that there was no available green space or that there was only private land that needed to be acquired at high cost, I think Regional Council staff might be more sympathetic to the case here. But I guess to summarise our position on this is that there's an extensive area of green space from the back of the existing car park all the way through to Guppy Road, and there is ample room, while acknowledging that it will be a reduction in the green space available to the community for recreational purposes. There is a lot there now, and its utilisation is not necessarily all that high. That does provide a viable alternative here, and based on the overall strategy we have for our river berms, increasing focus on the ecological integrity as environmental assets as opposed to hard physical assets, and the consequential management issues that arise, which can be managed. Summing all that up, our view is that the better option is to put it on the green space, which is currently sitting at the back of the existing car park.
Okay, well, look, thanks, James. That's a good
nice and
summation
clear. Thank you for that.
a good summation of the staff's position. I am interested, though, to understand why that clear and obvious option is not the preferred option, even despite the commentary from Napier City staff so far. Why the push for that? And I just want to, as a matter of order here, in relation to Mr. Waterhouse appearing before us, the recommendations are not to make a decision on this, or recommendation from this committee to council on the 16th. Rather, it's to commit to work with Napier City Council to direct a suitable location. So there's further work to be done by the looks of the recommendation. When would you expect there to be a decision before council on this? What's the plan?
Yeah. So look, it is a little bit dependent on the outcome of both of these initial meetings. The most favourable outcome is that both councils form a similar view around the preferred location, and then we would take a decision item to our next council pending.
So which is the next council?
On the 16th of December.
Sure. So you're looking for a decision, so you're going to bypass a committee recommendation and go straight to a decision of council. Is that what you're saying?
What I was hoping from today was to get a firm view, direction from this committee, and so there would be a decision perhaps from this committee, or the committee may ask for some more information.
Sure. Okay.
Chair, perhaps to clarify on that point, if, for example, council was of the view today that it should go to the NCC land and not on the river berm, but then we go to Napier City Council and Napier City has the alternative view, this council might wish to reconsider its preference on that. So it is a bit...
So we're not ready for a decision now?
Well, I think we do need to understand what Napier City's preference is.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that. I will call Mr. Waterhouse for only a few minutes, Craig, just simply to put the issues that you've got in mind in response to this. Would you mind coming up to the front and perhaps address?
While he's coming, could I ask a question of the Chief Executive?
Welcome.
James, thank you for that presentation. It seems to be that what we've got here is we're looking to make a decision on sort of, you know, like a very operational area of it. And your presentation went back and looked at what are the values here. So you talked about the green space, the values of that, about the values of the other. And what isn't here, hasn't clear, is the trade-off on the values. So I think there needs to be a discussion about that. And I'm really intrigued by your point about the open space and recreation and the conservation area values over here. So is it possible to reconfigure these assets so that we do maintain open spaces? And so could we not do a trade for the car park, for example, on the green space, and then make available our river boom in a better place, a better situation for open space and recreation, etc., where it isn't at the moment? So I think we haven't got the values right here.
So on that point, through you, Chair, the one of the, I guess, swap outs here is that the dog exercise area currently on the NCC land, which would need to move, could, for example, be within the river berm, and that might be more consistent with our overall approach to managing that open space. So I think that there is the potential for us to continue to enhance that river berm area for public access and enjoyment, which is more consistent with our use of open spaces, which, as you're all aware, is premised on restoring the natural ecological function of those environments.
Just an expansion on Councillor Barker. If we're going to talk about values and recreational values, I'd like to see included in there the cultural values around this development.
Sure.
Because I think to only look at a few and not address the other values that are important to us, I think would do disservice to our decision making.
Good point, given its proximity to culturally significant part of the landscape. Mr. Waterhouse, please, can you give us a few minutes of your time and give us a view on where your trust sits on this?
Well, certainly, if you add some other things into your modelling or ranking system that we're involved in, it might materially change the recommendation. And our board is so focused on making sure that it's not a concrete car park. We believe the only requirement for any hard service is to service EIT requirements. Right? If you go to the back of the car park at nights when there's regular users there, it's not that full. Schools come in vans and buses, and our requirement is more for car parking required under the resource consent issues, and certainly the car park would be divided up accordingly. We haven't reached a full conclusion. It would be in conjunction with you guys. We would certainly take a very eco-friendly approach, and the suggestion is that all the lighting would be solar. We have a really good security system at the moment, which has clear views. It would be the most protected over the stop bank area available, and you'd be well aware there's within 5 minutes of PGA, there's 5 areas over the stop bank that are currently used as car parks, although they're in shingle, or you're also very aware of the one in Clive, which is used for camping. So we think we can build something that's pretty special to the community and not just a car park, so it will give use to other people within the community, maybe have barbecues on the grass, more grass area, and we will have, I think, what will be something pretty special for the community, not just a car park. So the obligation to try and fulfil the EIT requirements is huge. They put a lot of money into that place when we built it, and our resource consent was conditional on them providing us car parks across the road, and we providing them with car parks. A car park out the back will not facilitate that. It's too far for students. They won't use it. They'll park on the road. The slither of land that we want off EIT is about 400 square metres. So that's a reasonable area of land that we need to ensure the safety of the build. But what it doesn't also consider is the long-term plans. We have long-term plans that will put another 8 basketball courts at the back, provided we can get resource consent. So currently, we're going to waste $1 million car park that we built. And I think the regional sports park is going through that at the moment too. And it just seems so non-visionary to build a car park over a space that we're going to have to move. Population predictions have us building another 2 courts every 3 to 4 years. You know, that's a real ambitious goal, but we've got cash surpluses every year, which we're predicting will grow to about $500,000 a year. That's before depreciation, of course. And we think we'll be in a financial position with a bit of government funding to expand that footprint every 4 years, and we're building it so the wall at the end can be moved.
Sure.
Right? So we're building it to an extent where we can continue to expand. And none of the potential for long-term planning has not been considered in the paper as well. So we're not quite sure where EIT will end up, but we had a pretty good moral obligation when they invested, I think, $3 million. I think you guys put $1 or $2 million in when you were giving out money.
Those were the days.
Yeah. So, you know, this is our opinion anyway, but we're biased.
Thank you, Mr. Waterhouse. It's good to hear that side as to where things have come to. Are there any questions of Craig while he's here? Councillor Graham?
Your strong preferences over the stock bank.
Well, up until 2 weeks ago, it was our only option.
Okay. And the second question is, so the EIT, are they going to be really difficult? How difficult are they? If we go to option 2, which is taking some of their land,
we couldn't get there. We wanted to go left, if you're looking from the front, on their land. And that was in Wayne's Jack's days, and we were about to launch a project probably 15 months ago, and he said, "No, I'll get you the land." They said no to me, they said no to him. I was surprised when they said yes to that 400 square metres, right? I think Chris Collins would like to present at the 16th as well. We'd like to present because we've got lots of other things we'd like to show you. He certainly has a desire to present at the Napier meeting if it fits with his plans. I don't know if he's got that permission from Napier yet.
All right, well, listen,
Yeah,
thanks very much, Craig. That's useful information. And I just want to now go to the recommendations and get your advice on that, Chris. Thanks, Craig, because it sounds like we are in deficit of a presentation to us on the issues raised by Mr. Waterhouse. My inclination is to, in considering recommendation 2, is for the Corporate Strategic Committee to reserve its position until it's heard a further presentation and to understand further the Napier City Council's position. Is there any other thought or view on that, Councillor Barker?
I would come back to my question again about values. I want to hear, to have it in the presentation, not just about where we land for the car park. So I want to have it, the values, and values, I include all values, so make sure we've got all the values covered in that. Because I think that's, when we get our values clearly understood and balanced, I think the decision will then become much clearer. Whereas at the moment we're just attacking, trying to see who's going to give this and who's going to give that. It doesn't quite sit with me. I think get the values right, I think we'll get the right decision.
That's a good point. So I'm wanting to modify the recommendations, particularly recommendation 2, that the Corporate Strategic Committee reserves its position on the location of the car park, and modify recommendation 3, commit to work with Napier City to provide direction on suitable location and to receive a report on the values. Councillor,
the report should include a set out of the values.
One of the values, including cultural values,
Yeah.
of the site.
Yeah.
Fair enough? Councillor Foss?
Just one question, and I'm in perfect agreement with that. Just, can you just, someone remind us, I think there's some drop-dead dates around this, us needing to give some direction, or both councils at least. Just remind, how does whatever that drop-dead date fit for their PGF funding fit with our meeting cycle? Are we all okay?
So it was I guess our intention to, if possible, provide direction before Christmas. I haven't been made aware of specific contractual obligations with PGF, for example, and that's something perhaps Craig could expand on.
There is a time frame.
What's your time frame, Kate?
Shovel-ready money we've got.
Yeah.
And the deadlines that they've set us, as we're supposed to have a construction contract today, we only appointed the preferred construction contract last week. We believe we have to get resource consent in before Christmas, right? So we'd like to, once we leave this meeting, we're going to start planning on alternative B, just in case you don't approve it, because resource consent has to go in. We have to start building mid-April.
Sure. All right. Well, listen, thanks, Craig.
And that's really important to know.
So they're important dates. I wonder whether those dates can be confirmed. I'm a little leery and wary of being pushed into a particular date, given recent experiences. So we need to confirm what those dates are, and if we're not needing to make a decision on the 16th, we'd like to know that as well. So I'm happy to move those recommendations from the Chair. Councillor Barker?
I'll make one other suggestion. I think what we've had so far is reports from the officers, no disrespect to them, but I also think there needs to be leavened into this a bit of politics, councillors, and I'd like the chair of this committee be involved in giving some commentary on where they think this should go, because there's politics in this as well, and I could sense the officers are stepping back from not wanting to be involved in the political process of it, but I would like to have a political eye put over it, and I just think the chair being part of that and say, well, I've heard all this and this is what my thoughts are, would help this committee make its decision more easily.
All right. Well, thanks for that. That's useful. Mr. Eden.
I've just got one point, and just to acknowledge the money that's going to go on, but obviously, and how do I put about that? Because, well, I suppose from Te Whanganui-Roto would most probably want to see a CIA done, cultural impact assessment, because obviously your Tātara Pā and what impacts it's going to have on below there and on the river as well. So just so you're aware, that'll mostly come up when you go through your consent process.
Yes, it's a relevant point. So have we given you a sufficient steer?
Yep.
And what I'm suggesting is that based on the potential dates, of the deadline dates for the central government funding, if we need to defer to the first council meeting or committee of council in at the end of January, if that's a viable option, perhaps we could take that time as well. So we've got this set of recommendations. I think you've vaguely got the gist of them. It's not a decision made. Councillor Foley, any comment on that? So we've got those. I'm happy to move from the chair. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Barker is seconding that. And just speaking quickly to it, I just want to acknowledge our colleagues from Napier City Council here today. They've heard our discussion. I'm really keen in picking up on Councillor Barker's point that we need to know a little bit more about what the preferences actually are. And so we look forward to your mahi on this and feedback to us. So we've had a move. Councillor Barker, do you want to comment? Any other comments on this from the floor?
Just a great example of a bilateral, I think, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you. Having no further comment, I'll put the recommendations 1 to 4 as they were amended and to be amended, and ask all those in favour of those recommendations will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no, and that's carried. Thank you very much, Chris. That's been useful. We're now up to our compliance report. It's agenda item 7, isn't it? So we've got, thank you, Nice to see you. We're up to agenda item 7, which is the compliance report, a very, very fulsome report, so excellent to see.
So, Chair, we've got Nick and Jack here to speak to this report, but if I could also ask Katrina to come up and just introduce to you, no, she probably got round the room before the meeting started, but can I just make sure that everybody's aware that Katrina Brunton, our new Group Manager of Policy and Regulation, joined us on Monday. So this is Katrina's first committee meeting. But we're going easy on Katrina in terms of her knowledge and understanding of the reports in today's agenda, given they were all issued before she even started. So,
Look, very welcome, Katrina, but you're going to have to spend the next minute telling us who Katrina is.
Right. Kia ora everybody. My name is Katrina Brunton. I have spent over 20 years now working mainly in local government. Started my career in Taranaki Regional Council, went to the Ministry of Transport. I've worked at Hastings District and New Plymouth District Council. Most recently at the New Plymouth District Council, group manager there of a wide-ranging functions, largely customer service and regulatory. I'm a mother of 3 children, a 13-year-old, a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old. My husband is a Taranaki local, and we are owners, for want of our sins, of a dairy farm in Stratford. That's about it, really.
Welcome.
Thank
Good to see
you.
here. Yeah. Who's leading out on this august report?
Kia ora koutou. Morena, Councillors, Chair. We have the 1920 Compliance Annual Report. We do have a presentation for you to go through some of the highlights. I'm happy to take questions throughout, but would be preferable to at least get to the end of the presentation. And we seek the committee receive the report and recommends to Council for adoption so that we can publish this on our website. So I'll just go through a quick overview, and then Jack's team leader of our urban and industrial team, and he'll go through some of the detail of the report itself. So the report represents our activity across all our compliance and enforcement functions, which actually runs from 1st of July 2019 to the end of the financial year, 30th June 20. This is the first full year that we've had reporting using an IRIS system. We had a switch last year from our old DAISY database system, so this has allowed us to really drill in a lot more because of the functionality of the system to provide a lot more information. Last year, you might remember, we reported specifically on local authorities in terms of their 3 waters. This year, we've actually reported on the activity itself, so stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, to try and give a regional picture of what's happening across the region, but there is nevertheless commentary on there and the compliance in relation to that. There's a little bit of detail on the restructure of the team, how we've sort of set ourselves up to deal more with specialisation into more the rural side of things in terms of what's happening there in the industrial and urban side of the business. And we make a little bit of commentary in there on COVID-19 restrictions and how we were able to respond. Bit of feedback.
No, Martin Williams hasn't turned his microphone off.
Thank you. And on how it...
Can I just hold you there for a moment?
Sure,
Thanks,
sure,
Jack.
Chair.
Welcome, Martin. You're zooming in from sunny Blenheim, I understand?
That's right, just arrived. Carry on. Thank you for
see us?
including me in this way.
Can you see us?
Yes, I'm sorry for being late.
Cheers. Welcome. Carry on.
Yeah, and some commentary in there from COVID-19 and how we responded. It coincided with the drought conditions as well, so there was quite a lot of focus and effort for the compliance team in responding to some of those conditions. It did impact quite heavily in terms of the monitoring and monitoring charges for certain parties, so
particularly through the hydrology. So what would normally be a $100, $115 charge, some people got billed quite a bit more in terms of that. And it was just explaining to that community why we had those increased charges. And in terms of physical monitoring. So I'm just going to try the return button. So what we've done is actually try and give a lot more pictorials this year to make it a bit simpler to, at a quick glance, look at what's happening. So we have roughly about 8,500 resource consents on our books overall. Not all of those require monitoring in that year or in that period. So of those, we have about 3,300 that require the monitoring, which includes the large majority of those are the water takes, and a lot of that stuff comes in through our telemetry, as you know, and we monitor it with a water information services team. The rest are made up of approximately 5,000 odd board permits and structures, such as culverts or installations as well, which we don't necessarily monitor, maybe at the time of installation, but other than that, it doesn't require frequent monitoring unless there's some issues with it. So this is how we've just, you'll see in the report that we've broken up the, to give an idea of the actual purpose of the resource consents, such as either irrigation, forestry, wastewater. So that gives a pictorial of the makeup of our consents that we have with council. But also we've actually drilled down in terms of the actual activity type. So if there are any questions on that, I'm happy to take at the moment. But,
Councillor Lambert.
Just a quick one on the how you receive or you monitor them. So do they all have telemetry devices attached to them?
That's a good question. The majority, depending on the actual volume, is required under some regulations that we actually have telemetry on those, and the majority of those actually come through in terms of telemetered results, which would automatic. Yeah, automatic. Yeah, it comes across automatic. There are a few that need to pick up, but we have regs that require that telemetry.
I think from memory it was 10 litres per second, but it's moved to 5 litres per second now.
Yeah.
The de minimis.
Yes, it started at about 30 litres per second, and depending on the volumes, and it was brought in over a number of years, 10 litres per second, and the de minimis really is 5 litres per second. So I'm just going to hand over to Jack, and Jack's going to take us through the resort and the actual detail of the report.
Good morning, everybody. So, in terms of our consents monitored this year, we actually saw an increase up from 90% last year to 92.5% this year, and a lot of that was down to additional water takes being granted during the year, which are monitored through our telemetry system, so it allows us to monitor more consents with the same amount of resource during the year. We did see a decrease in the percentage of fully compliant consents, so last year we had 33%, and we're down to just shy of 90% in this period, and most of that is as a result of discharge to land and water consents. So our water takes were roughly the same as last year, 97.5%, but our discharge consents there was a significant difference. So last period it was 81%, and we're down to 71% fully compliant this year. A lot of those are low risk or moderate non-compliance, so our level of significant non-compliance where there's a genuine or significant environmental impact, those have stayed steady, whereas the low risk is reporting and timeframes, and moderate is for a lesser environmental risk or continued non-compliance. So just to highlight, our new compliance structure is into urban activities and rural activities. So from the urban area, we've got our municipal effluent, stormwater, industrial effluent, and industrial wastewater. Now these were the activities or industries that had the highest proportion of non-compliance. and municipal stormwater and effluent are right up there as they are around the country. But a significant proportion of this region's wastewater facilities are non-compliant. A lot of them are in the process of being upgraded so that they can meet the required standards or meet their discharge conditions, and where they're not, enforcement action has been taken as well. And the biggest group of non-compliance is our industrial effluent discharges. So these are domestic effluent systems in industrial and commercial premises. And they're predominantly non-compliant for reporting, servicing, and occasional discharge standards not being met. And where these have the most impact are over the unconfined aquifer, which is where we focus our compliance efforts in getting them up to standard, because they have the most potential for impact. And in our rural areas, our main consented land uses are wineries, dairies, feedlots, and forestry. The other main land use would be agriculture and irrigation, which is covered by the water takes, which were largely compliant. With our wineries, most of those were related to data reporting or exceedances of discharge quality, and where discharge quality has been exceeded, those are generally over the unconfined aquifer, and there has been enforcement action from us, and significant work by the consent holders themselves as well. So the majority of those non-compliant wineries are now meeting the required standards in this current period. Our dairies, a similar story, generally compliant, and the significant non-compliances are for discharges of dairy effluent to land and to water, some of which have been out there publicly, and there is enforcement action either underway or completed for most of those non-compliant dairies. Forestry is probably one of the good news stories in terms of compliance. So there's 46 consents and roughly 150 permitted activity that are monitored under forestry, and those have been largely compliant, with only a few non-compliances for one site for earthworks not being to best standard, and one site where sediment control was not up to scratch as required by the consent, and both of those have been addressed either by the consent holder or with enforcement action.
So I'm just going to take over from Jack for a little bit in terms of enforcement action, but we're, as I said, at the end of this, we're happy to go through any detailed questions you might have on some of those activity areas. So we did see a drop in complaints, over 11%, and we attribute that largely to the around the COVID period, where we're only responding to really high-level incidents. In relation to those, we have also seen a decline in the number of abatement notices and infringement issued last year. So either the message is getting through, which and so because we've ramped up our compliance over the years. So, the type of incidents that we actually see coming through, some of them are more serious. We've certainly ramped up quite a bit in terms of our high-level enforcement action. So we have on our books 4 prosecutions last year. At the time of this report, we were at 12 prosecutions, and we probably have got some active 16 cases at the moment. And we don't take that lightly. That's reserved for the most important cases that we're required to do so. We've just actually appointed a senior investigator because that was taking quite a bit of time from the compliance officers, actually his ability to get out and do enforcement to handle that caseload through the courts. So it's nice to see the level of incidents tracking down, and let's hope that continues. And I've just included a little bit around what our main areas of work, what's ahead for us this coming year and the year after as well. As you know, you'll see through the LTP that we've put in for some more officers and some more administration support. I think 6.4 FTE overall. But so Tuki consents, as you know, and the farm environmental plans, which are up for review soon and updated 3 yearly, is quite a focus. So that's more on the sort of non-recoverable permitted activity side of council, which will actually go into consents. The bore security program, as you know, will continue to identify those bores that actually need the upgrade work, and we've had to target that. We do rely on a third-party operator in terms of actually producing those reports through, and I just wanted to make it quite clear this is, and while we require information from the TAs and stuff in terms of how the program's reported, and you'll see there's a table report on that. I just want to make it quite specific. This is different from the drinking water quality that actually comes out at the other end, and so we're responsible for checking more the security around that and the discharges around that area, and noting that. Forestry monitoring program, as Jack said.
Stop you there, Nick. Just run by that again, please. We're responsible both for the security compliance issues and the water quality issues.
So it's the quality in the catchment that comes through, but the actual drinking, I just want to delineate that from the drinking water quality itself that is actually monitored and
by the consent of
by the consent. Well, yes, and the TAs in terms of the supply. So
are those quality reports a part of the consent? Do we have eyes on?
No,
we don't.
No, not in terms of the actual quality. In terms of
that goes to the drinking water assessor, which is currently sitting with the DHB, or they're about to transition to Taumata Arawai, and the current conversation we have with Taumata Arawai is co-locating their staff alongside our compliance staff, so we're getting complete visibility of the picture. But in statute, that sits presently with drinking water assessors.
So do we have consent responsibilities at all, or in terms of?
We have consent responsibilities in terms of the actual physical structure itself, and to ensure but also what other consented activities might be in the catchment. So if there's some effluent discharges or groundwater in terms of that might impact on those. But the actual what we get out at the tap, as James has said, is the drinking water inspectors, and Taumata Arawai, the new drinking, they're currently with DIA, but we'll pick that up as June next year. I just wanted to make that, so that's not a comment necessarily on the quality of the water itself, but on the works, and we've put a table in there in terms of what the main risk consents are for.
But in terms of consenting process, irrespective of that chain of operation, the buck stops with us, as Havelock North has demonstrated, that irrespective of who owns it, it still stops with us.
I would say it depends, and there are a number of parties responsible for the overall of that.
There's shared responsibility, I guess, which was and with respect to the source protection zones, and we've got those for Heritonga coming through the tank plan change. There's existing source protection provisions in the tank, in the Tuki plan that are operative. We have responsibilities there, but we also need to work with the territorial authorities around land use decision-making and controls, because they have many of the levers about activities that can occur within the source area that may contaminate the drinking water supply.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And Taumata Arawai have just been requesting quite a lot of information from the councils, both regional council and also the TAs in terms of the quality and data collection, and all of that is starting to be collated for them for their oversight role as they're going to shine a light on compliance in terms of that area. So the other area that's really quite big for us, or starting to ramp up, is in relation to forestry activities. We had some 192 notifications to us that either required resource consent or came under the NES, over 281 different activities, and we're talking from from harvesting to sediment, earthworks controls, river crossings, all of that. And it was pleasing to see that we didn't have any really significant non-compliances. Where there were some issues, well, we sorted those out pretty sharp, and the companies have responded very well in relation to those. Sorry, just the last slide before we can get into. Just gone to sleep a little bit. And as Council are well aware, the NPS FM, freshwater management, and the National Environmental Standards and the 360 regs, which looks at both stock exclusion, but also some, as we talked about earlier, some of the water takes as well, in terms of the monitoring of those, water metering. That's really a big part of the focus, not just of the compliance team, but of the implementation and catchments management team. So there'll be a lot of monitoring requirements for us, and in terms of major implications for stormwater. And the other thing I just wanted to point out is that we're looking at still improving how we get our information, and Jack and I just came from a meeting in terms of trying to get some of the geolocation stuff into our IRIS system, and that we can actually pinpoint some of those, how we have those, the monitoring, the permitted activities and stuff in our catchment, so we can actually report on a catchment level if there's a focus area that council specifically requires a report on, or in terms of getting better information for that very point you might made about source security, in terms of that area, that we can actually collate that information and look at that geographically to get a better picture of what's actually going on. So happy to take any questions that.
Great, great report, but I'm sure there'll be plenty to chew on. We'll take 20 minutes on this, so Councillor Ormsby.
Kia ora, welcome Katrina. So I've two lines of questioning, one I'll have now and maybe at the end to leave my colleague Peter to ask some of the cultural values that are talked about in here. But the first is around our visibility around the key milestones or KPIs that are set when you go into a compliance situation, when you sit down with our TAs around their wastewater and their stormwater. So can we get more visibility through possibly a dashboard like with the Environment Integrated Catchments Committee are going to have for this committee around where those milestones are and how they've been able to achieve them? Is that something that we can have here?
Thank you, through the chair. The answer is yes, and it's quite complex and a bit more work, but it's something that we could work to, because we actually have to pull out, in terms of the actual resource consents, more than KPIs, as it were. But there are major bits that we could do, yes. And it's a case of sort of refining down what are the key activities within those resource consents that you might want to report. But we're having the conversations right now about the support from IT and what's our next phase and what we want to report on. So yes. Yeah,
I'd really value that to inform us on a more regular basis, possibly quarterly instead of these annual reports.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Cheers. Thanks, Councillor Foss.
Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor.
Oh, mine's just a quick one. Just on the dashboard of the four, you had dairy farms up there and some other kind of farms. Do the numbers look much different by farms? Because some of your commentary talks about an organisation that pleaded guilty when enforcement action went through the courts, which that's fine. It's not a commentary on that. But for example, the dairy farm serious breaches, I think is 4 farms out of 106 consents monitored, and the big red item's 4. And then the next one's down 12. Similar question to the wine, actually, viticulture industry. If you just take out 1 or 2 players which you've taken this enforcement action through, and the courts have decided, or they've pleaded guilty, whatever, do those graphs look hugely different? Are they 4? Is one player responsible for 3 of the 4 breaches, or is it just quite widespread? Because I can't quite work that out from your commentary at the bottom.
Yeah.
Because your gold standard thing, I mean, there's a deterioration overall, which you talk to, but I'm just the absolute worst breaches I'm trying to work out.
Through you, Chair, in terms of the actual significant non-compliance, yes, it is only a couple. So in relation to that, the picture, there has been a slight learning, but the dairy farms have been pretty good in terms of their actual compliance, and any major non-compliances have been addressed. The incident that we actually took was in report to, in terms of the one prosecution that we're waiting on a decision on the court in terms of sentencing, was reported through a discharge. But we do pick stuff up through follow-up and through monitoring, so that came as a result of a complaint or an incident report. But yes, the major non-compliances are mainly related to a small number.
The 79 farms, I think you monitor all up, I think you say in your report. So, okay, that's great, thank you. That's all I was asking.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I have two questions, Chair, if you're liberty. The first one's a bit of a follow-up from Craig's, and that is there a way, if we have a farm or a industry or anybody that is a repetitive polluter, that we can go for the directors of the company? Because a lot of these companies are limited liability companies, and the directors have got certain fiduciary responsibilities, and I would like to see us, instead of just seeing in the paper or in the thing that we've gone for XYZ Limited, XYZ Limited, and we've taken the directors. That may be one for James, just hold the answer for that, but I want to start seeing some of these people being held personally responsible, especially when they're repeat offenders, and we do have a couple of those. That's my first question. The second one is, I look on page 40 here, and we talk about, and of course this was high profile, landfill vulnerability. We have a landfill vulnerability at the old Fernhill dump, and I could talk to you for 2 hours about that because I'm very aware of the old Fernhill dump, and just got covered over. And I have, and some of the people that live in the Twyford area, we worry about that because that's where the aquifer comes through. And you hear all this anecdotal thing from the well drillers that there's a hard surface there, but I just want to make sure that we are monitoring that dump, because if God knows what was put in there in the last 5,500 years, and if it seeps into our aquifer, that would just be a calamity beyond belief. So are we on top of it? And I'd actually like to, I've nagged about this for some time, like to see a report on this. I hate asking for reports from you people, but we do need to, this council needs to understand the risk that is around that old dump site. It's no good just putting soil and planting a pit of spoil on top, which is what we've done. So, are you over it?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I'll answer the first question, and James is free to chip in if he wants, and also Jack. So yes, we can go for company directors. It's quite common practice now, with particularly for repeat offences through councils. We do consider that information and what evidence we actually have as in terms of involvement if we decide to lay a charge, and we'll work through that with Katrina and James. So yes, the simple answer is yes, we can,
and we have recently. So we have laid charges on company directors in relation to a dairy discharge event, and that's working its way through the courts at the moment.
Thank you. That's good. Second one.
In terms of the landfill vulnerability program, I'll ask Jack to maybe give some commentary. So it is an area that is identified at risk, and we've actually put some, here's a fit for some FTE towards that in our LTP. So so I'd be happy if you seek to approve that. But so Jack, can you give a little bit of more of an update of the program itself?
So with the landfill vulnerability program, that's it's been completed. It's pilot in West Coast and Canterbury fairly successfully. So they've identified all of their closed landfills, operational landfills, and historic dumps, including farm dumps, and they've got a part of the program is looking at different vulnerability to coastal inundation, river erosion, flooding events. So they look at the flood data. We've got all the climate change data, and we overlay that with our spatial database of the landfills, and then it gives a risk rating score, which gives you maybe a top 10, top 20 of landfills that you need to be concerned about and should be looking at. Last year, we monitor the closed landfills annually, and all of the at-risk ones that we expect to be highlighted when we finish this project in March, April next year, they've already largely been identified, and it is the responsibility of the TLA, who owned and operated that dump and owns the land, to maintain its integrity. So that has been raised with them already for the ones that we consider to be a concern. In terms of your question about the contaminants leaching into the aquifer, so most of these dumps, when established, were not lined underneath in the 40s, 50s and 60s. So it's likely that anything that was going to leach, we most likely would have seen it in some of either our state of the environment monitoring or some of the other monitoring that we do within that area. And we haven't, as far as I'm aware, seen anything that comes up, red flags around these sites, either in the monitoring they do under the consent or the monitoring that we do in the wider aquifer area. And maintenance of that cap, although you're only looking at the top rather than an unlined base, generally sitting on gravels, especially in the Fern Hill area, that cap stops infiltration of water through whatever waste is remaining, so it reduces the chance of leachate production there.
Thanks very much, Jack. That's a good response. Look, I just want to check, Councillor Williams, have you got anything that you want to ask there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. One question. I've just, as you know, come out of 2 days with the Wairoa consent hearing, and I can't obviously talk about that, but I do encourage anyone who's interested in what the reporting on that involves in terms of the significant non-compliance there to read the Section 42A report, because there's a whole level of detail behind some of this reporting that isn't immediately available on the face of it. So encourage you to read that. The 32% municipal significant non-compliance is quite a striking element of this report, and I guess a call for the merits of the Three Waters program, or a test case of why it's perhaps needed, is one way of looking at that. But my more immediate question, if I could get to it, is we've got an enforcement policy as a council, and there are Crown prosecution guidelines that inform that policy, as does Ministry for the Environment best practice. I'm just wondering if it would be within the realm of governance and not crossing the line into the operational level of enforcement to have annual reporting of, say, the top 10 or dozen non-compliances, the most significant, with a matrix table giving an indication of why a decision was made to prosecute for, say, some of them, and versus the encouragement or, working with, or infringement notice or abatement notice for the others, to give us a sense over time and build up a picture of how that policy is being applied, in case we decide as a council we need to look at the policy settings to the extent that that's open to us as governance. So that's my question. Annual reporting for the threshold of what's prosecuted and what's not, and what the enforcement method that was chosen and why for the most significant non-compliances that come through. Is that something that we could consider?
Chair, can I suggest that might be something that we do a workshop with council? I think there are legal risk issues around us disclosing some of our judgments and decision-making in relation to enforcement action that we wouldn't want to necessarily have used in a court setting. So I think it would be more appropriate to do that by workshop.
Yeah,
I agree
I
with that.
appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Look, I appreciate that. My question is more after the fact, and gaining an understanding of how the policy is working or not. I mean, this is a really important dimension of local authority responsibility is enforcement. And we set the policy, we see the results, but understanding some of the logic in that, I think, is something we should have governance insight into. That's my view. I'm aware of the sensitivities, but perhaps we could have an initial workshop on that. I'd be grateful.
Thanks, Martin. Did you have anything, Councillor? Sorry, Rick, I'll come back to you. I'm just sort of going right to left here, left to right.
Thank you, Chair.
Right to left to right.
First of all, welcome Katrina to the team. Just a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Under the meat and by-product processing, just read there that AFCO sort of comes up quite often. Is there a problem with the relationship there, or are they, you know, is this historically, do they keep appearing? What's going on up there?
Thank you, and through the chair. So, as you know, this report is, in terms of compliance last year, there has been significant non-compliances at AFCO over the time. There's been quite a bit of change at AFCO in terms of the person responsible for environmental monitoring. But we have got things that we actually are looking at the moment, and I think it would be helpful to have any more discussions in relation to that. But like that, we're monitoring across the program in terms of the consent conditions. We always have a process of the 4 E's of, you know, engage, educate, enable, enforce, and as part of any enforcement follow-up, there are discussions in relation to the specific events and consideration of those. I think, as James says, it would be really helpful that we have a workshop to actually drill down into the sort of ministry best practice guidelines and the merits, you know, the process that we actually need to go through. Councillor Williams has just talked about the enforcement policy, and the regulatory scape is changing quite rapidly with who's in charge of what, and a lot of what was sort of permitted or not in terms of the, as I said, the change to the NES and consistency policy around that. So that would be quite a good time to pick up through, I think, a workshop in relation to how we take the decisions, and maybe give some examples or case examples.
My hand up for that workshop.
Chair, sorry, could I just quickly add? Look, it's self-evident from the report that there are persistent non-compliance issues with AFCO Wairoa, and that is the reason why you know, further enforcement action is under active consideration at this time. Got some more to say on that?
Okay, great.
Councillor
Paul, is that sufficient?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So next one, you mentioned the winter crop regulations. Not all, in fact, most farmers, landowners, still not consent holders in that regard. So what's the plan, you know, next winter regarding the regulations, and, you know, are we hoping to get out there and monitor every single winter crop out there, or what's the plan if there is one at this stage?
So there's a national body of work underway. There is a working group that's been established under the, I guess, the support of the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Primary Industries, that is currently looking at the winter grazing regulations and the practicalities of implementing those. And we're working with our colleagues nationally to get guidance on how to treat this issue. It is a significant issue for the sector overall, because there are many thousands of properties that will require resource consent by May next year, and there will be resourcing implications for regional councils. So we're looking at how we might collectivise that exercise. Ultimately, farm environment plans will be an alternative to resource consent for winter grazing, as long as those issues are adequately managed under their farm environment plan. But unfortunately, the regulations are going to take effect before we will have had the opportunity to roll out farm environment plans right across the region. So this is a significant challenge for the sector, and we're working with our colleagues nationally, I guess, is the story on that, including our marketing communications team are engaged nationally to ensure that we have appropriate messaging to landowners as soon as possible around what are the obligations and requirements on them.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more?
Thank you through the chair. I'll just cover. There's what's been set nationally, and there is some sort of crossover between what we have in our plan in terms of feedlots and what might be winter grazing and cropping. And slope is one of those ones that's on the discussion. But we do. I was having a chat with the integrated catchments team, or in terms of the slope information that we do hold, and that if there is, and how we make that information available. But we encourage anyone to come in and speak to us in advance of the 30th of May, when they actually kick into consent. So if there's some of that, we're not totally clear in terms of there's a lot to be worked through, as James said, but we do have some information that we want to be proactive and assist landowners if they want to come in and inquire of the consents and implementation teams.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, just one more. Just reading about consents across the TAs and not singling out anyone in particular. It's just a general theme of non-compliance, and you go to explain what mis-sampling, late reporting, failure to undertake audits. I mean, you can understand not having the money to invest in upgrade infrastructure, but that sort of stuff should be just 101 kind of council operation, shouldn't it? Is that what this
point,
I think there is a widespread capacity and to some extent capability issue around Three Waters management across the country, which is why central government is presently looking at structural reform around delivery, and it's also why the 5 Hawke's Bay councils elected to undertake a piece of work around the future delivery, which has identified capability and capacity constraints as a key current and future issue, and that's why we are looking at alternative delivery models both as a region and also as a country that will seek to address those through probable aggregation of the operation of those assets and ensuring that we've got critical mass in terms of capability.
Yeah, excellent point, and I'll come back to it myself. Councillor Barker, you've been very patient, thank you.
As always, my question is directed to the Chief Executive. I have recalled having an intense discussion about reporting on these matters previously, and I recall Council passing a resolution to have a quarterly report. I do, and I just thought, well, here we are, I've got an annual report coming back. I just want to say, can we go back to the Council resolution of having regular reporting on this, rather than just annually, interim?
So Chair, look, I'm happy to look into that. We do provide reporting on our compliance activity in the monthly significant activity update, and also it is covered to some extent in the quarterly organisational performance report. But I'm happy to take this offline and look at whether there are opportunities to enhance the volume and quality of our reporting.
Sure.
I just think a quarterly focus on this would be really helpful.
Next, and I was coming to a similar position, but are there any other questions? Councillor Foss, you've got one. Oh, sorry, I'll take Peter.
Mr. Eden.
Yeah. It's just in relation to water take and monitoring, and obviously Three Waters have coming in, and I see in 22.3, page 26, he said about ensuring consent conditions that require consultation and engagement with iwi are met by the consent holder. And I suppose, as an example, always good to have examples. Since we're talking about Wairoa, and we had discharge in there from the funeral parlour, and obviously that culturally wasn't sensitive to our Wairoa community. And so I suppose moving forward, as we go through the changes that are coming through legislation in there, how do you see that operating in regards to consents for water takes in there that are taken by people out of the different catchments? I see you talk about catchments in there, and I suppose that engagement with Māori, because obviously that's a tonga that they treat in that catchment, that water, whether it's the Mohaka or the Ngararoa or the Tukitok. So I suppose that'll obviously is going to be a big discussion moving forward in the future. So just wondering how you're going to engage with to make sure they adhere to those consents as part of the compliance obligations in a meeting, iwi or tangata whenua obligations in regards to water take and that.
Kia ora, and thanks through the chair. Look, we've made some commentary on that in terms of that we've made a start, but not necessarily have had much time in terms of how we develop that reporting, because as you know, some of our resource consents only require notification in terms of, say, incidents in relation to certain parties, but it's how do we go beyond that and have better reporting and better relationships in terms of informing around incidents and what's happened, while we might make efforts outside of that we haven't really developed a great program in terms of that, and working with Pierre's team, we're looking at seeing how we can better engage and make that information more available to
I suppose
the various parties as well. So it isn't, and as I said, we're seeing a lot more resource consents actually coming through with reporting requirements and conditions and cultural conditions and Matawana Maori conditions. But we've got somewhere we've got to do one way, and it doesn't mean that we can't do that, and it's not something that we've resourced up in terms of a compliance area, but we've made a start and acknowledging that and reporting on that, and it's.
And as an example, because I know we're doing some with Napier City Council and we're going for a prosecution at the moment, but then we've had to go through those conversations, and obviously only because we led that discussion that's enabled that to happen. So hence when you go for your compliance and if you go for a prosecution, obviously we want to be engaged as I'll talk across right through iwi, Ngāti Kāinui, PSGs, and all those groups, they need to be consulted in regards to what type of action is going to be taken with that individual.
Absolutely, and we've actually started on that process in terms of some of the enforcement processes that we've actually had, in terms of actually getting cultural impact statements in terms of the actual effect on Tāngata Whenua in terms of those actual localities as well, and it's something that we've actually developed. We started to report a developed template in terms of involving that. So I am aware of that, and we have not necessarily in that location, but we actually have had started a process of actually having that input and working with Pierre's team to actually maybe formalise something. We've just appointed a new senior investigator, and that is actually one of the things that we're looking at in terms of a standard process for engaging guided.
Okay, I can discuss that with Petty. And the other point was just industrial pollution. You touched on it. I think you said 74%, and I suppose the concern is in the Ahuriri area of the catchment, and obviously if there's industrial pollution going down that drainage system, obviously it's indicated in the cultural take, because our whānau obviously get kai from out in that area, and then obviously we over a number of years we've had to tell them to stop going to that area to harvest or to get kai, and I know Tongua Marae a few years ago where we got mussels and they'd got sick. So I suppose, is there an issue with compliance and in the Ahuriri estuary?
So through you, Chair, and I might ask Jack to chip in on some of the latest around that. There's actually there's a consent, but there's what's called a comprehensive consent, and while we don't actually, a lot of the discharges that take place or that exceed are outside of the consent. They're not consented discharges. I know that NCC are actually currently in the process of taking the first prosecutions on the bylaw stormwater, so we've worked quite closely in terms of improving what's going on in that catchment up the pipe, as it were.
Yeah. So with those
concerns, so we can maybe give an update quickly on.
Yeah. So with that Pandora consent and the West Shore tidal gates, which is the rest of the city, they have cultural health impact monitoring requirements under that, which are a physical monitoring of kai moana within that estuary. They've undertaken, under the Pandora one, which was granted 2016, I believe, they've had one round so far. They have to do it once every 2 or 3 years, and the other one was due to be undertaken in March, and then we had COVID lockdown, so it wasn't able to go ahead. That's recently been organised to be undertaken in the last month or early next year, and then we'll have a bit of a better idea. And our other large consents like Panpac and Port of Napier also have conditions in there requiring them to undertake cultural health impact monitoring, which also includes appointment of kaitiaki monitors. So the consent holder will train and include them on all of the monitoring and take feedback from them to adjust their monitoring program to make sure that we're accurately assessing those cultural health impacts. And if there are any impacts from that, they will be treated similar to the
Just to
environment.
finish off, because I suppose that I'm Māori, obviously that was moved from that area, and we've got an annual kūtō mussel dive we go out. That's had to be pushed out now because obviously the 7th is a note taken that area out on the Moana. So we've had, and then directly our whānau impacted by that. And then I think when the civil emergency was declared, that obviously allows for discharge to go into the estuary because of the condition that brought through the flooding, which obviously is not good for ourselves if the system, for whatever reason, can't cope. So it is an important factor, just so you're aware. And so I suppose the compliance around the Ahuriri area is quite important. Yes, thank you.
Great series of questions, Peter, and pleased to have them. Look, we've got, let's put a time constraint on what we're doing here. I knew half an hour wouldn't be enough, but let's have some quick fire questions, because there are some, and quick fire answers if we can. Yes and no is good. So away you go, Councillor.
Right, thanks, Chair. On your page 11, it's the municipal water supplies again. Just want to take us back to there, because for Napier and Hastings, 100% of the bores in use have been tested, and you've been satisfied of their security. That's fine. But, for example, Hastings has 34 consented bores which could be used. So what surety do we have for the obligations that this council has, that those 12, 34 less 22, those 12 bores in Hastings are not used until such time as you complete your work? Oh, sorry about the yes, no, lack of.
Thank you. So we've been very been in very close dialogue about the actual reporting and the monitoring. Some of those bores in relation to actually talks around telemetry, they're not being used. We include ourselves in that in terms of one of our bores that we actually have that supply, and we'll either use either directives or not in terms of not commissioning or using those until such time that we're satisfied that those requirements have been met.
So sorry, the lessons learned from Havelock were everyone thought they were doing a great job, but people got to talk to each other.
So we've checked all of those, and we've checked in terms of what is actually being commissioned and used. But if it's not commissioned and not being used at the moment, we're not monitoring it. But we'll have a notification, because a process when you have a resource consent, you have to give a notification of start, a notification of works to be done. Right. And so that's to check in for us that we have been notified and that the bore will be commissioned or be used. So
look, bore security is a key part of the water safety plans that the territorial authorities have to hold and be signed off by the drinking water assessors, and that will include a program of bore security work on any new bore being brought online for a municipal supply.
These are not new ones.
Councillor Ormsby?
No, or one that's currently not in use. Yeah.
Okay, I've got 3 questions, yes/no answers. They relate to 24.1. The first question is it best practice that staff complete the cultural assessment part of a prosecution report? The second question is it best practice to go along with prosecution without cultural impact assessment from mana whenua? And the third question, will we be changing our systems to ensure that we have mana whenua be a part of that cultural impact assessment in the future with prosecutions?
So I'll take those in the order. The first one's 24.1.
It's on the paper, item 7.
It's our paper.
Oh, 7.
It's in the.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to really look at that, you can just answer yes or
it
no.
depends on the nature of the event. So typically, if it was a localised odour discharge, we would.
Can I be specific?
So
The Tutaikuri River discharge?
Tutaikuri. So I recall from the charging sheets in relation to that the impacts on mana whenua was certainly cited and included, and there was engagement around that incident, as I understand, with proximal marae. I think it is an area where we can continue to grow the extent of the assessment to include in our charging documents, and we can certainly always take evidence from mana whenua in relation to those cultural impacts. So that's something I think we can look at, whether there's room for improvement there, but it certainly is something that at the moment is included where we believe it's relevant.
And it might have been a bit like Chair Mortio, and we had no discussion, no one contacted myself, so only thing I read about it was in the paper.
Look, we had a discharge event this week in the Wairoa River, and one of the very first things that was done was contact was made to the Tai Whenua to advise them of this incident. So we certainly see it as part of the practice, and where there is an impact, it's part of the evidence we'd want to bring forward as part of a prosecution.
We'll just take one more from Councillor Lambert, and I haven't even started yet, so.
Yeah, I used to be with the PSG. One of our relationship principles we had with the regional council was no surprises relationship. So to that end, do you advise the PSGs on applications for consents, whether notified or unnotified?
So slightly
Yes,
wide
yeah.
of the compliance team's work, but certainly the answer to that is yes. So it would depend again on the application itself, but typically a combination of the post-settlement entity, maybe a Tai Whenua contact, and also marae contact as well. So we maintain a database, our Pātaka database of who is required to be contacted and consulted in relation to resource consent. So that is a key step in the process.
I know we asked for that in our particular treaty settlement.
Indeed,
That
yes.
we have, whether it's notified or unnotified, because obviously it has a big impact, especially if it's unnotified and you don't know what's going on in your rohe.
Let's round this off and then get to a cup of tea. But I think going back to Councillor Williams' workshop, it's going to be a full day's work. That we've got a lot of ground to cover. I've got a few issues, and hopefully we can traverse these very quickly. I just want to take you, Nick, to page 11 or 48, which one of those you'd like to choose in the report, page 11 of the report. And you've got the table there around bore security, which I really appreciate. It's a really useful table. Can I make a suggestion for the next report that we do lump that report on municipal drinking water supply in with the three waters component? So we segregate out stormwater, wastewater, and drinking water municipal into one section. And I think from the commentary or you pick up here is that we have our issues with municipal consents across the board, and you'll hear me, Katrina, going on ad infinitum about our relationships with TAs and the need to come to grips with this. Now, so my passing question on that table before moving to my next point is, are we comfortable with CHB and Wairau District non-compliance around their bore security? Is that a level of urgency? And I know my discussions with the Chief Executive that this potentially done but not reported back. So is that the explanation for the tardiness in the report?
So through the chair, in relation to the CHB, the work has actually been done. We're just waiting to receive the reports, and we did follow up on that. So that's done. So that's why it hasn't got the tick. But
Thank
it's,
you.
the assessment.
That's the answer I needed.
So-
Can I take you to page 33? And this is in relation to... sorry, no, I won't go there yet. I just want to take you to the... I appreciate a similar table to the bore security one for the consenting issues around wastewater and for stormwater, similarly constructed, so that we're very good. The line of sight, I think, is a critical thing for us in these reports. This is a great report. We need to keep moving on, and that'll help us if we go to a quarterly regime to simply report against a known template. So that's probably don't need to answer that.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a comment. So we're happy to give sort of snapshot reports in activity areas, and it would be great to have some feedback if you like the sort of pictorials that we actually do. So we can actually pull out to council or committee a snapshot report where we're up to. The reason that we do have an overall annual report is it's standard format, but a lot of the information through consents isn't required till the end of the year.
Sure.
Yeah, and we don't get it till maybe...
Probably my point on this is that choose the right tables there and then work back from there in your snapshot so that we can see progress.
And if you wanted feedback to Katrina in terms of what snapshots you would like on a more regular basis, that's something we can do.
That's excellent. Look, I do want to go to page 33 and we've reported on our regional council's own compliance. Yes. And is this where we crawl under the desk and say, what have we got to say about that?
So, yes, I mean, this is the first, last year we started on it and started to sort of shine the light, it's a new phrase, in terms of our compliance and how we could do better. So there has been an improvement there, particularly the really significant non-compliance was over a bore, which hasn't been used. So we said you can't use it, and it's not in actual use at the moment, not until we actually get that meter in.
Okay,
there.
but I think that
but yes, we could improve. On
well,
it
no. Could improve is from your governor's perspective. Could improve is not good enough. It's not good enough for a regulator to be non-compliant like this.
So we're looking at it more closely. We're actually holding to account in terms, and you will see that in maybe reports later on. This just covers to the 30th of June, so we are taking a much stronger line. But
look, Chair, it's a very fair concern, and this essentially does relate to the asset management part of the business, where historically the regional council has operated through permitted activity rules and not had a focus on ensuring that all of its activities are treated in an equitable manner with other consent holders. We've changed that approach, and now the compliance team is doing the good work of highlighting those areas where we need to ensure that we are fully compliant, and that will be certainly my expectation for the asset management group that typically operate under these consents for the year ahead.
Great, thank you. Can I just finally, before my own imposed deadline, 11 o'clock, go to page 31, 2/3 of the way down the page, and I want to go through this, and my apologies in advance to Katrina because my autism keeps coming through, and I'm a dog at a bone on this.
That's honest.
Regional Council meets on a regular basis with local councils as part of stakeholder engagement meetings and steering groups to discuss compliance, monitoring, reporting requirements, etc. So there's a paragraph there on our, if you like, relationships across the board and with the TAs. I'm aware that staff are perplexed by my requests for bilateral relationships and what that means. What I would like to see, so you're really clear on this, is a very clear plan about the connection with the TAs, the discussions that are taking place. We have a structure around that so that we know we've got meetings with those that are attendants, we've got minutes of those meetings, and we've got a forward plan of what are the outcomes that we want from that engagement.
So this is only one part of the business, a very vital one, that we need to have line of sight about what that relationship looks like. Now, 3-4 years ago, I put a request in to council, this is in regard to Havelock North, for the engagements we'd had, meetings, etc., meeting minutes around Havelock North Water. I still haven't received that to date, and I'm afraid I don't think it actually exists. I could be proven wrong, but 4 years later, it's not here. So what I'm saying is, to remedy this problem, we need to have line of sight on what that structure looks like, and we need to know. And I refer you to across the page, for example, to page 32. We've got this engagement, and it's excellent engagement with the Central Hawke's Bay wastewater treatment, and there's clearly dialogue going on, but we need to know what the plan is, what the performance indicators are, did we actually meet, and where are we going? So if staff are wanting clarity around what we mean by bilateral relationships, that's part of it. That's an important part of it, that we know what's going on in those engagements, and we can monitor and measure that on a quarterly basis to say, are we on track with our engagement? I'm sorry to sermonise here, but...
No, I'd like to support you on that, Councillor Curtin, because I think at a political level too, we're asked what we do in terms of that compliance space, and I honestly couldn't say, other than these annual reports, how we enforce or what conversations are had. So actually, reputationally for the regional council, it could look bad because the councillors don't know what's really going on in that space. Okay, so there's a few levels of wanting to know the technical information, that we are on track, that they are on track, but also that we can answer those questions from the public.
Okay. Chair, I think the workshop suggested by Councillor Williams on our approach to compliance and enforcement will hopefully address Councillor Ormsby's concern in that regard. And look, we will bring you back a forward plan around the bilateral engagements. I think one of the things that's helpful for us to clarify is whether there's an expectation that would also involve bilateral governance engagement. It's something that we've been talking to our other council colleagues about as a distinct possibility. And for example, we see some value in getting this council to Central Hawke's Bay in the not too distant future for a bilateral engagement with CHBDC around their long-term plan and their Three Waters infrastructure and all the challenges that they're facing, as well as some of the regions, the regional council's challenges that we have in Central Hawke's Bay as well. So I think the chair has suggested a visit to Councillor Foley's farm, for example, which we might be able to tie in. So if we can build into the program for next year some of those periodic engagements too, hopefully the councillors on both sides will have an elevated level of understanding about what's going on at the officer level, as well as bringing you a plan for the year ahead.
Councillor Foss.
Yeah, I think, Chair, I think it's a really good idea, but with all your examples there, James, thank you. But it's actually also a stock take on actually what is happening now, because as Councillor Curtin just articulated, he's been requesting something along these lines a few times and for a while. So the stock take might just say, actually, there's nothing formal going on. Well, that's fine if that's what's going on, or in fact there is. Not sure. So it's less, I'm very interested, less the operational, it's a senior leadership level, I think, which would be interesting because it will give us a starting point or to make some decisions on if we actually do widen it or narrow it. But right now, I feel very uninformed as to actually, other than the mayor or the chair's kind of forum at that level, next level down, what's actually going on.
And look, I'll fully acknowledge that at the moment it's ad hoc and it's a bit reactive. Katrina and I, for example, are meeting with the Chief Executive and Senior Management from CHBDC next week in relation to their Three Waters upgrade program. But we don't do that on a regular basis for all of the TAs across their Three Waters at the moment. It is very much in relation to the pressure points, so it is a bit reactive. So we'll bring back a program that will give you more confidence that it is regularised.
On that note, can I ask Councillor Foley to move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Graham? Those all in favour of, those in favour...
I wish to speak.
Sorry, you wish to speak. Gosh, okay. My apologies.
Firstly, does Will...
Councillor Foley?
Oh, look, I'd just like to say thanks to Nick and Jack and the team. It's obviously been difficult years of drought and overboard, putting extra pressure. So yeah, well done on your achievements through what you had to deal with. So thank you.
Councillor
Thank you,
Graham.
Chair. Yeah, I would thank you for this report too. I think it's a really good report. Of course, we can do a lot better, and we can try and inform council a lot better on what we do. But I would just like to say that over the last 12 months, I've been really impressed that you have been really proactive on enforcing things, and you haven't wimped out, you know, and that's really important, that we have a tough compliance team that doesn't play politics, that just does the job that has to be done. And sometimes it's our mates that are getting done over, and we have to deal with that at a different level. But I really appreciate the fact that you go in there with clean hands and do a really good job. And I think you've really stepped up over the last year or so. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Graham. Well, just a comment is that the report is an excellent one, a good place for us to keep launching from, and just to compliment the Chief Executive for some excellent appointments into our regulatory team. We can look forward to some real invigoration going on. So, and welcome Katrina to the team. I think you'll do an excellent job. So. Oh, sorry, Councillor Barker, you had a comment as well.
I think yes, I do. I want to congratulate the team on the report, a great report, and welcome you, Katrina. I noticed that all your occupations going east and west across the lower North Island. I have to explain this one day, we've gone up and down, but on the report, I'd make the observation, I've been on this council a while now, and the first time we came to these matters, there was considerable concern about how the compliance team was operating at a political level. And I want to say to the Chief Executive that he has done a fine job here and got the ship about right. The second thing I want to make the point is that we went through quite a lot of time and agony to get ourselves a compliance policy. We did a lot of work on that, and I thought we have got actually a really good policy. And at the heart of the policy is this notion of changing behaviour rather than beating people up as the first option. Because that's what we want. We want to bring about a change in behaviour. So that's our policy, and if people think we should have a different policy, well then I think they should articulate that and justify it for what the reasons for that. So change of behaviour, bring about different behaviour, but if that fails, then of course we then have to go to compliance. I want to register my caution about the seminar and what we're going to do in these things. There is a clear difference between politics and about prosecutorial matters. And I have to say I am concerned when people are discussing the idea of having staff account to the council for their decision making and the rationale for prosecuting or not prosecuting. I can't see how that is going to be interpreted in anything other than seeking to interfere in the process. We do have a lot of tools as to how we can handle these things. Firstly, as I alluded to before, is our policy position. We do it in a policy position because we are a policy entity. Secondly, by the amount of resources that we put to it. Thirdly, by the sorts of reports that we have today, which is about the headlines and what we do. And we also get reports from our other teams about how the environment is being managed. All of these gives us insight to how we are managing our regulatory framework. And I am someone who's very conscious of the clear line between politics and between prosecution. We have to have independence in that regard, and I am one who will speak out to defend that line on every occasion.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments before taking closing from Councillor Foley? Any other comment? Councillor Foley.
I don't really have any closing comments.
That's great.
I'm thirsty.
He wants a cup of tea.
Well, look, I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. That's carried, and a well-deserved cup of tea for everyone. 10 minutes is all we allow ourselves.
10 minutes.
10 miserable minutes.